Today I'm going to show you an action thriller film from 2007, titled American Gangster. Be ready for spoilers ahead. The film kicks off in 1968, in New York. Bumpy Johnson, a disciplined and intelligent gangster, runs much of Harlem and imparts his wisdom to Frank Lucas, his former limo driver, now turned out as his right-hand man. Bumpy, a man of formidable reputation, is a feared gangster and respected across the city. One chilling night, Bumpy orders his Frank to light a cigarette, which he uses the flame to burn a man alive. Under Bumpy's shadow, Frank has transformed into someone cold and calculating, just like his mentor. However, one fateful day, Bumpy and Frank were discussing the decline of America's middle class. Pointing at a television, Bumpy ranted about how capitalism was crushing the common man. In the electronics store, Bumpy suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. Frank caught him just before he hit the ground, but it was too late. The king of Harlem had died of a heart attack, leaving Frank holding not just his body, but the future of Harlem's underworld. At his funeral, Harlem's elite, public figures, and flashy new gangsters gathered to pay their respects. However, these young gangsters were reckless, flaunting their wealth without understanding the discipline that kept Bumpy's empire intact. Observing the crowd with a keen eye, Frank found no genuine sorrow among them. Only Bumpy's devoted German shepherd appeared to be in mourning. Many dismissed Frank as just a driver, but a relative of Bumpy approached him and shares something surprising. Bumpy had always spoken highly of Frank, even calling him the son he never had. He had even left a significant sum of money for Frank. Feeling both honored and burdened, Frank vowed to collect every penny owed to Bumpy and protect the legacy his mentor had built. But Harlem's underworld was no longer the same. A brash new gangster named Tango began muscling in, collecting protection money from businesses and threatening Frank's small betting operations. Frank, having learned from Bumpy that patience and precision are key to success, remained unfazed by Tango's threats. While others postured, Frank quietly plotted his rise. He decided to enter the drug trade, but his initial efforts proved disappointing. The profits weren't as high as he'd hoped, and the product wasn't up to par. Following a TV report about the cheaper drugs being supplied to the American servicemen in Vietnam, Lucas made the decision to bypass the middleman and purchase the product directly from the producers in Vietnam. Frank believes that by cutting out the middleman, he'll be able to provide a higher quality product at a cheaper price than his rivals. Meanwhile, in New York, Detective Richie Roberts is facing his own challenges. His marriage is failing, his career is in jeopardy, and his reputation in the police force is in ruins. Richie is too honest for his own good in a world where corruption is the norm in the police force. During a routine investigation, Richie and his partner stumbled upon nearly $1 million in unmarked cash in the vehicle. Unlike most corrupt officers, Richie chose to turn the money in instead of pocketing it. His rare honesty makes him a hated member of his precinct, causing his partner to be exiled from the force, while Richie's rampant womanizing behavior and undercover double life lead his wife to seek a divorce and custody of their son. One night, Richie received a frantic call from his partner, who had shot a man in a black neighborhood. Richie rushed to help, but as the situation unfolded, he discovered his partner had been high on sleeping powder during the incident. When Richie refused to cover it up, his partner panicked and fled. Days later, his exiled partner was found dead from overdosing on blue magic, a relatively new and powerful type of product being sold for less money than its drug competition. Meanwhile, Richie's honesty is rewarded when his superior Captain Toback puts him in charge of a newly created task force, mainly to stop major illegal trafficking in New Jersey by going after the actual supplier rather than the middlemen. Richie handpicks honest cops and gets to work on finding who is supplying blue magic. Richie zeroes in on tracking the source of this potent product flooding the streets. Back in Harlem, Frank was quietly consolidating his power. Unlike the loud and flashy gangsters around him, Frank understood that discretion was the key to success. While making his tracking by the authorities more difficult, he smuggles his products into the country by leveraging the Vietnam War. He hid the shipment in the coffins of fallen American soldiers. With a great monopoly on quality products, Frank quickly makes a fortune and buys several nightclubs and apartments. He moves his family from North Carolina to New Jersey, where he purchases a large estate for his humble mother. His 5 brothers are enlisted as his gang lieutenants in the trade, forming the Country Boys, who work together to traffic and sell the products on New York streets. Together, they ran the business empire with precision and loyalty, values Frank had learned from Bumpy. One afternoon, as Frank sat in a cafe lecturing his brothers about discipline, he spotted Tango swaggering down the street, still collecting protection money from Frank's small business. Frank decided it was time to make a statement. He walked out and confronted Tango, demanding 20% of his earnings. Tango laughed in his face, mocking him as a nobody. Frank, without a word, pulled out a gun and shot Tango point blank in broad daylight. The street fell silent as everyone watched the grim sight. Frank's message was clear: he was not to be underestimated. That moment cemented Frank's reputation, and it sent a chilling warning to anyone who dared challenge him. As Frank's business prospers, he makes a point of operating quietly and dressing with a modest conservatism, both as a sign of strength and to avoid attracting the attention of the law. In the midst of his climb to the top, he attended a party and met Julianne, a stunning Puerto Rican beauty who captured his attention. They soon married, and Julianne brought out a softer side in Frank. Yet he knew that in his dangerous world, having someone to love was a risk, a weakness his enemies could exploit. Despite the risks, Frank couldn't resist her charm. Frank had a unique philosophy for a gangster: avoid flaunting wealth. However, one fateful night, Frank attended the fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, adorned in a gaudy chinchilla fur coat and hat and securing a ringside seat. As it happens, Roberts is on duty observing the event and sees this unknown but obviously wealthy person associating with high-level criminals, as well as having better seats than the Italian Mafia high-stake dons. Roberts becomes suspicious, and he begins to investigate this, unknown to him but well known to the criminal figures in New York organized crime. Richie began digging into Frank's life. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Frank was the mastermind behind the blue magic product flooding New York and New Jersey. However, defeating Frank would be challenging due to his highly efficient operation and the support of high-ranking allies, including corrupt police officers who were willing to look the other side for a cut of profits. One of these officers, Detective Nick, was especially brutal and greedy. He viewed Frank as a mere source of income. Nick and his men constantly harassed Frank, demanding more bribes and making threats. However, Frank remained resistant to intimidation, and in a bold move, Frank bombed Nick's Mustang in broad daylight, sending a clear message that he would not be bullied. Later, Frank faced another challenge. Nicky Barnes, a local crime figure, began diluting Frank's product and selling it under the Blue Magic name. To Frank, this wasn't just bad for business, it was a personal insult. Tensions escalated quickly, and violence followed. One night, assassins targeted Frank and Julian as they left an event. Fortunately, they survived, but the attack left Frank shaken. As things continued to get worse, the fall of Vietnamese General Saigon cut off Frank's product supply from Southeast Asia. His supplier advised him to quit while he was ahead. However, Frank wasn't ready to give up. He scrambled to adapt, searching for new ways to keep his operation afloat. Meanwhile, Richie Roberts received a fortunate break when Frank's relative was apprehended red-handed in a crime. Under duress, the relative consented to wear a wire, which led the Richie's team to the crucial location of the product shipment. When the shipment landed, Richie's team conducted a thorough search, even inspecting the coffins of fallen soldiers. They found no traces of drugs, and a federal agent dismissed the idea that a black man could run such a sophisticated operation. Frustrated but determined, Richie pressed on. As Richie's investigation gained momentum, Nicky and his men took advantage of Frank's vulnerable position. They raided his mansion, stole his cash, and killed his beloved German Shepherd, a cruel act meant to humiliate him. Enraged, Frank contemplated killing Detective Nick. However, Frank's mother talks him out of it. She pleaded with Frank to find another way. Under immense pressure, Frank's resolve began to crack. Frank realized that a single misstep could lead to the collapse of his entire empire. Later, Richie and his task force finally obtained a warrant to raid Frank's drug operation. As police swarmed drug apartments across New York, a fierce shootout erupted, leaving several of Frank's men dead and resulting in the confiscation of the shipment. During the chaos, Frank was in a church, seeking solace in the midst of his crumbling empire. As soon as he left the church, Richie arrested him and took him into custody. Richie confronted Frank face to face and laid out the evidence, making it clear that Frank faced a lifetime in prison. But he also offered Frank a deal, reducing sentencing in exchange for cooperation. After some contemplation, Frank agreed to become an informant. He provided Richie with the names of dozens of corrupt cops, leading to one of the largest corruption crackdowns in New York history. Nick, facing imminent arrest, chose to end his own life rather than face justice. Frank's testimony resulted in the conviction of over 100 individuals involved in the drug trade and law enforcement, dismantling the corrupt system that had allowed his empire to thrive. Years later, in 1991, Frank Lucas walked out of prison. The once mighty king of New York's drug trade was now just another face in the crowd. Richie, the man who had taken him down, was waiting for him. The two shared a cup of coffee, a quiet moment between former adversaries. As Frank walked through the streets of Harlem, he saw a world that had moved on without him. He had lost his empire and his influence. Frank Lucas was no longer a king of Harlem, just a man alone, forgotten, and left to reflect on the choices that had led him there. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.